Hi there, I'm Drew Badger, the world's #1 English fluency guide, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to another advanced listening practice lesson. In this video, what I'd like to talk about is focus. Again, focus is such an important part of learning and life in general. But in the previous, maybe the kind of recent videos I've been producing, I've been talking about focusing on maybe describing a particular item like a backpack or a knife, and just showing that that's a really good use of training for your fluency, so you can speak about a particular thing, and because you can only speak about that particular thing, it forces your mind to get a bit more creative and to use and learn lots more interesting words and phrases that are specific to that thing. Because even describing something like a backpack or a knife, you could actually fill an entire book with just describing that thing. Maybe the different ranges of colors or sizes or shapes or uses or histories. Lots of different things like that appear when you're talking about something. And again, when you're focusing on that particular thing, that's what can really train you to speak more fluently. So today I'd like to do the same thing, but with just an actual phrase, or a full sentence, I should say, and showing that this is how you should really be practicing, because this is the same way I practice and the same way I teach my personal students, and helping them improve just by focusing on a particular phrase. This is what helps you master grammar, as well as improve your pronunciation and blend the sound of your speech so you sound much more like a native English speaker. So let's just take just a random phrase. Let's see. How about, could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Okay, so maybe you've heard that song before. Could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Or can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Or can you tell me how to get to the post office or any place? But we'll just do Sesame Street just because it's a thing from a song you can listen to, and you can hear that right on YouTube. If you search for a Sesame Street song, you can probably find that as well, or other places. But anyway, it's just an example of something where you can listen to both me speaking and as well as other people speaking, or I guess in the case of Sesame Street, little kids singing about how to get to Sesame Street. But we'll just take this particular phrase, and so, could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Now, the reason we focus on a particular phrase like this is because the grammar structure of could you tell me how to do something, so could you do something, or could you make something, could you ask something, once we understand not like the grammar point itself, but what the sentence is trying to ask for, and this is really a big difference for kind of my personal learners versus the people that are normally learning in a typical classroom. Typical classroom learners will think about a grammar point and try to learn that first, and they try to learn, okay, could, and then you, or could, and then he, and then they try to learn the actual rule for that thing, whereas my personal students are more learning what's the actual point of the sentence? What's the grammatical structure or the meaning that we're trying to say? So it's not thinking about a rule and then how you express that. It's more thinking about what's the actual thing I want to express, and then what are the words that we use for that thing. And this is a different way of thinking about it. This is actually the way that native speakers think about it. So a native English speaking child, or you as a native English speaker of your personal language, your native language, when you're thinking about this, you're thinking not only what do I want to say, but then what are the words I need to use for that? So young children are not thinking, okay, what is the grammar rule that I learned in school? And then what are the words I need to do? No, they don't think about that at all. They're thinking about what's the way I want to express this, and then in what other situation have I heard this before? So what they're really doing is taking a pattern from one thing and then just using it again in something else. So they eliminate the need to think about the rules at all, because they're kind of listening to their parents, and over the course of many, many years, when their parents are explaining things to them before their children can even speak, and this is the same thing that happens with my daughter as I'm practicing with her, every day over and over again, I'm going over things like, hey, could you get a book, or could you do something like this? I'm training her that I'm asking her to do something. Now, she doesn't grammatically understand all of the words or is even able to reproduce any of that. She can speak some words, but she doesn't really explain herself in a grammatically correct way, or even just grammatically at all. Because number one, she can't really speak yet, but number two, she just hasn't learned the rules, and she's not going to school to learn that, even though that's something young children do learn in school. And it's funny that when children go to school to learn grammar rules, this is when they kind of have trouble expressing themselves. Like at just about the age that they start learning grammar in school as opposed to just speaking naturally, this is where they start, really having trouble with writing and other things. That's kind of a topic for a separate video. But in this video, I just want you to understand these two different ways of thinking. There is the rule-based approach where you think about what is the grammar rule that you're focusing on, and then what are the words and the word order, and then how do you produce that sentence. Or you're looking at what's the way that other people have expressed this general or even the same idea in different situations, and then how can I apply that to this situation? So really, it's just two different ways of thinking. And the second one is the much more appropriate way for the human mind, because we're just not good at being able to remember rules in that way. Maybe you can if you practice over and over again, but typically, if you're the kind of person that has to translate in your head before you speak, you learn the rule-based approach, and now you're trying to translate in your head, and it's just really frustrating for you. So the reason you don't want to do this again is because you can't communicate effectively and communicate spontaneously. So if you want to stop doing that, and that's the subject of this video, really what you have to be doing is focusing on how other people are expressing something in a certain way, and then how you can do that, but maybe using a different word. Because could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street is the same structure as could you tell me how to get to the bank or the post office or the drugstore or any of these other things. So fluency begins by mastering an understanding of what the actual rule is without actually knowing what the rule is. So if that makes sense, it's understanding the rule without being able to write the rule down. So maybe a native speaker wouldn't be able to tell you what a phrasal verb was, but a phrasal verb is, but they can use a phrasal verb, without any problem. So if I say pick up something as opposed to elevate something or to lift something, this is a way a native speaker would learn it from a very early age. And this is why phrasal verbs are so important and why we teach phrasal verbs in our visual guide to phrasal verbs. Anyway, so let's focus on this particular phrase. So when we're looking at just one phrase like, could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street, we begin by just saying it over and over again and understanding what the actual sentence means. So not the individual words, but even if you don't understand everything, if someone was looking at you and maybe they were speaking a language that you didn't understand, like they're an alien, and they're kind of maybe pointing on a map to a particular location that is Sesame Street, and so they're looking at this map and they say, oh, like, I want to go here. And maybe you don't quite understand what they're saying, but they're saying, could you tell me how to get here? And maybe you hear from somebody else or some other alien, could you tell me how to get to this other location? And you slowly understand that there's a pattern developing here. So they're saying, could you, like they're speaking to me, tell me, and they're referring to themselves, so could you tell me how to get to this particular location? Or how do you get to a particular location? How do you go to that location? So again, this is a native way of learning something, and you can do the exact same thing. And typically what learners who have been trained in the classroom do is they're listening for individual words and then trying to remember them. And this is why people have a lot of problems with idioms. So idioms are things like kick the bucket, which means to die. But if you're looking at just the words individually, to kick a bucket, that has nothing to do with death. And this is the definition of an idiom. So a word or a phrase that is communicating one idea, but the words of that thing do have really nothing to do with the idea that you're expressing. But native speakers are learning the opposite way. They're taking the idea itself and then working backwards and just assuming, okay, he said kick the bucket. I don't really understand why he said that, but I understand what he meant by that. So, my friend kicked the bucket. Blech. Like he died. Okay, so kick the bucket means to die, and maybe if I hear that phrase from one or two other people, I know, okay, this is a common phrase, and typically young children are much more accepting of a language like that. So when you were young and people used something, you didn't say, hey, why do you call it kick the bucket? Most people just accept the language. So this becomes more difficult to do as you get older and you start questioning things, and it's just another reason why it's more difficult for people to learn as they get older, even though you really can do things much better than a child, especially learning a language if you just learn in the right way. But getting back to our phrase, could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? We're listening for what is the pattern here. So somebody is asking us that, and then we can begin using it. Could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? And then we begin using that. Could you tell him how to get to Sesame Street? Could you tell her how to get to Sesame Street? And by changing just one word, we're still keeping the general grammar structure intact, but we're able to talk about somebody else, and then this expands our fluency. And by fluency, again, I mean the ability to use a language point or even just the language in general without having to think about it. So right now I'm just speaking and I don't have to sit and translate in my head about what I want to say. I just start speaking. And this is the exact same thing you can do as well if you focus on particular things. And there are kind of general phrases like this that have particular grammar structures that we hear over and over again. And again, you should be listening for not what the rule is, but kind of understanding the rule by understanding this group of words represents a particular idea. So could you tell me how to do something? This is a common string of words that's used together, and it's often heard. So people will say, could you tell me how to do this? Could you tell me how to do that? And then once you master being able to just understand and use that grammatical structure, then you can start blending the words together to make it sound much more like a native speaker. So let's say I'm a learner and I'm hearing that phrase for the first time. Could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Okay, so I hear the phrase and I say it a few times, and then I practice, could you tell him how to get to Sesame Street? Okay, so grammatically I can direct the different person. Or could you tell me how to get to the bank? So I could talk about a different location I want to get to. And really from one grammar structure, you've got lots of different sentences you can make, and this is how you multiply the ability to speak fluently, because you're practicing different things. And this is exactly the way I do it the way I started doing it when I changed the way I learned when I was learning Japanese. So I began learning Japanese the typical way where I have listening practice exercises and I have to try to study grammar rules, and I would read grammar books. I actually read grammar books and did grammar drills. And then of course I can't use the actual grammar in a conversation because writing rules in a book does not translate to actually being able to use that grammar. And it actually hurts you from doing that because it teaches you to translate. So once you get to the point where you can say something, could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Then you can begin blending the sounds of things as you listen more for what native speakers are saying. Because typically a phrase like, could you tell me something? Could you tell me where the school is? Could you tell me something like this? Because it's said so many times and people understand that grammar structure or that particular string of words or phrases that people are saying, that's when things start getting shorter. You'll notice when people are speaking in a scientific community or they are trying to introduce a new word or phrase, so something that's new, maybe they've created a new idea, they speak that slowly because they want people to understand what's happening. But something that happens over and over again, these are things that everybody assumes everyone else understands. So this is why we speak quickly. And so a phrase like, could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street becomes, could you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? So it's, could you tell me how to get. So we don't say how to get to Sesame Street. We say how to get to Sesame Street. How to get to Sesame Street. How to get to Sesame Street. So if you go on YouTube right now, you can probably find it. Just look for Sesame Street song and you can hear little kids saying, could you tell me how to get, so how to get to Sesame Street, how to get to Sesame Street. So if you want to improve a particular grammar point and even just develop fluency in general, this is one simple way to do it, and it's something that you can do whether you have a person practicing with you or not. Really, you're just listening to what the phrase is, understanding what the general phrase or that grammar point means, and then you practice that using maybe a different word or phrase inside that so you can understand, like, could you tell me how to get to I don't know, how to get to fluency, or could you tell me how to get to the moon? It doesn't really matter what that is, but the grammar structure stays the same. So if you're thinking about it in that way, then you can practice it by yourself, and you know it's correct because the grammar structure wouldn't be changing depending on what the location was. It doesn't matter. And then you can listen really carefully for how the blending occurs in the sentence, because again, something that's used over and over and over again, it naturally shortens over time because people understand what that is. And again, they're trying to communicate an idea, but really people, I mean, if we didn't have to open our mouth, it still takes a long time to express what we want to say. Maybe in the future we can just think something and the other person will understand it intuitively. Hopefully we will get to that point. But until we get there, you can see we're moving in that direction where people are trying to communicate things as quickly as possible. And this is why we blend the sounds of our words when I speak, or when we speak, I should say. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Today, pick one particular grammar point or phrase, whatever it is you want to practice. It doesn't matter. You can even pick something a bit more difficult for you, but just try to take that and then manipulate that. Change one word here or one word there in the sentence, and then you'll get much better at being able to explain that thing, and then you can take that grammar structure and use it in other situations as well. And then after that, practice the sound blending of it, especially if it's something that's used very often, and then you will develop a really good sense for being able to understand native English speakers as well as being able to improve your pronunciation. That's it for this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, do click that like button and share this video with others who are also trying to improve their fluency. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and to be sure you get that, you will receive a notification every time we release a brand new video if you become a subscriber to the YouTube channel, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. To continue learning, click on the link in this video to download Speak English Naturally, our free guide to speaking and sounding like a native English speaker. The guide reveals the 3 most important kinds of conversational English you must learn if you want to sound native, and will help you experience instant improvement in your fluency and speaking confidence. To download your free guide on a mobile device, click on the link in the upper right of this video. To download your free guide from a computer, click on the link in the lower right of this video. I look forward to seeing you in the guide.